Czechoslovakia's Gottwald. The Czechoslovakian story, a good example of subversion in action. The great liberal statesman Edvard Benes, after 7 years of wartime exile, is unanimously elected president of the Second Czechoslovak Republic by the Constituent Assembly. But the communists, a militant handful, force the formation of a coalition government and proceed to split and then wreck the opposition. To emerge the leading party in the cabinet under Premier Gottwald, a meeting of the communist-dominated General Federation of Labor is taking place. The Reds infiltrate the army and the trade unions. Gottwald denounces the anti-communist members of his cabinet. Zapotocki, chairman of the General Confederation of Labor, demands a general strike. The delegates vote. 2 committee members have the courage to abstain. Work stops. Czechoslovakia is paralyzed. Freedom dies as Benes is forced to accept the resignation of the last anti-communist in the cabinet. And then he too resigns. Foreign Minister Jan Masaryk, a great patriot, still has illusions.
It's up to us, the so-called little people, and I personally proudly claim membership in that great mass of thinking and working citizenry. Come along with us, join us. Let's criticize together. Let's make suggestions together. Let's insist on being heard, and actions are bound to follow. Truth shall conquer if we give it half a chance. I'll be seeing you.
2 weeks after the takeover of Czechoslovakia, Masaryk is dead, allegedly a suicide. Benes, who also thought he could do business with the communists, dies soon afterward. To divert attention from his next move, Stalin orders violence in South America. In Bogota, Colombia, Dr. Jorge Gatlin, Colombia's most popular political leader, is murdered. Communist handbills printed in advance blamed the murder on the government. Within 24 hours, 1,000 dead, 136 major buildings destroyed, the result of the communist-incited riot. Unexpectedly, Stalin blocks Allied access routes to Berlin. The flood of refugees fleeing from communism embarrasses him. Stalin conveniently puts aside his solemn promise during World War II for free access to the city. This time, however, the United States stands firm. Thousands of tons of food and supplies are flown into Berlin every day. Stalin is made aware that interference means war. He backs down. The roads are reopened. Mao Zedong arrives in Moscow to participate in Stalin's 70th birthday celebration, December 1949. The new Moscow-Peking axis poses an ever more ominous threat to the free world. The communist narrator translates.
The most vital tasks at the present time are to fight the warmongers, strengthen good neighborly relations between the 2 great states, China and the Soviet Union, and thanks particularly to the correct international policy of Generalissimo Stalin. In the Presidium are leaders of the party and government, representatives of the various Soviet republics, and of the Communist and Workers' parties abroad.
Khrushchev proudly proclaims Stalin the genius, leader, teacher, father of the nationalities, great industrializer, great collectivizer, creator of Soviet culture, careful gardener tenderly rearing the human beings in his charge. Nikolai Zvernik makes the introductory speech. To his left are Georgy Malenkov, first secretary of the Central Committee, and Lavrenti Beria, Stalin's Minister of Interior and State Security. Next to Stalin are Mao Zedong, Walter Ulbricht, Deputy Prime Minister of East Germany, and in a place of prominence, Nikita Khrushchev. In preparation for his next move, Stalin steps up the clamor for peace throughout the world. a rash of peace demonstrations breaks out. This is one of them. The communist narrator says,
"On Berlin's Marx-Engels Square, the German youth demonstrate in defense of peace against the remilitarization of Western Germany. The German youth is greeted by the delegates to the World Youth Festival, representing 101 countries. Among those marching are 35,000 young peace champions from Western Germany who managed to get through Adenauer's police cordon. 2 million persons take part in the procession. In the evening, there's a youth meeting on the square. The speech of greeting is made by Walter Ulbricht, Deputy Prime Minister of the German Democratic Republic."
Youth everywhere are brainwashed.
У комунізм свої вітрила щасливий править Волгодон, і непоборна наша сила, яку не взяти у полон. Щолом за це віддати. Звідкільця висіг, і хто могутній міг з'єднати серця у нас усіх, єдина мати.
Communist narrators continue.
The artist borrows Prorokov's illustrations to Mayakovsky's verses about America. They lay bare the real nature of present-day America with its false democracy, lynch law, thirst for profits, and the brutalities committed by the militarists. These illustrations won the artist the Stalin Prize.
Before us is
A gay and noisy carnival fills the streets until the early hours of the morning. The people condemn the warmongers, enemies of democracy.
In communist North Korea, a nightmare of national brainwashing is taking place.
He supervises the work of a group of writers translating classics of Russian literature and books on the Soviet Union. Among the first books earmarked for publication in the Korean language is a biography of Generalissimo Stalin.
And in Moscow, North Korean leaders absorb Soviet techniques. The Korean people are unimpressed. Tens of thousands flee to the democratic South. Korea becomes the Germany of the East. Stalin decides to do what he didn't dare to do in Germany: take control of the divided country by force. June 25th, 1950, the North Koreans launch a surprise attack. Their advance is spearheaded by Russian tanks. But once again, the United States stands firm. Stalin miscalculated. The Cold War becomes a hot war. American troops, later supported by forces from the United Nations, hold and then rout the North Koreans. Mao Zedong pours 1 million Chinese so-called volunteers into the fight. After 3 years of conflict and negotiations, agreement is reached. Lieutenant General Nam II signs for North Korea. American Lieutenant General William J. Harrison signs for the United Nations. The cost to the United States for stopping the Red aggression, 135,000 casualties and $20 billion. These are American soldiers, some of the 10,000 prisoners of war senselessly slaughtered by barbaristic communism. And these are South Korean soldiers. And the Reds retain control of the 15 million North Koreans. The Kremlin. Stalin's war, hot or cold, is stymied. He needs scapegoats for his failures. On August 12, 1952, 400 Jewish artists, actors, and writers are murdered. Next, leading Jewish doctors are accused of a plot to poison the Soviet leadership and of working for foreign intelligence. Stalin tells Ignatiev, the then Minister of State Security, "If you do not obtain confessions from the doctors, we will shorten you by a head." Stalin instructs, beat, beat, and once again beat. Caught in the frenzy of his purge, Stalin now plans to liquidate his entire inner circle. Molotov, Malenkov, Beria, Mikoyan, and thousands more are threatened. But before the murders can begin, Stalin dies of a stroke. The end of a tyrant. At the bier, the beginnings of a struggle for power reminiscent of the death of Lenin. Again, a triumvirate. The heirs apparent are Molotov, Beria, and Malenkov, who now becomes premier. Khrushchev is still in the background, waiting. Within months, the new rulers are shaken by the popular uprising against a red dictatorship. East Berlin, June 17, 1953. The sign says, "We want freedom." It starts with workers demonstrating against intolerable conditions and spreads rapidly until people of all classes are demanding democracy and an end to the communist regime. Part of the Iron Curtain is torn up. The red flag is hauled down over the Brandenburg Gate. The Red Army intervenes. Sticks and stones prove useless against Soviet tanks. For East Berlin, after 13 years of Nazism and 8 years of communism, one glorious day of freedom. The red flag goes up. For Secret Police Chief Beria, Berlin sounds a death knell. Khrushchev finally sees the chance to split the triumvirate and take over Beria's police power. Among other charges, Beria is accused of treason by his failure to foresee the uprising and is arrested. Khrushchev says, "It has now been established that this villain had climbed up the government ladder over an untold number of corpses. Beria is executed." Now, as Secretary General of the party, Khrushchev follows in the footsteps of his predecessors. The opposition, Premier Malenkov on Khrushchev's right, is disgraced and forced to resign. His successor, Nikolai Bulganin, here with Marshal Zhukov, is a Khrushchev puppet, and Khrushchev soon succeeds him. Molotov is banished. Khrushchev staffs key posts with his own followers. Then, in a maneuver that astounds the world, apparently in order to conceal the truth of his connection with the shameful past, Khrushchev turns his attention to the overpowering image of Stalin. This is the 20th Party Congress where Khrushchev delivers his secret de-Stalinization speech. Comrades, the cult of the individual acquired such monstrous size because Stalin himself supported the glorification of his own person. Was it without his knowledge that Stalin monuments were erected throughout the country? These memorials to the living? Was it without Stalin's knowledge that many of the largest enterprises were named after him? That many of the largest towns were named after him? The communist narrator continues.
The inhabitants of Varna, now known as Stalin, voiced their warm affection and loyalty to the great Stalin and the Soviet Union.
Khrushchev continues. And when Stalin asserts that he himself wrote the short course of the history of the all-Union Communist Party, the work created by a group into a book written by Stalin, this calls for amazement. His short biography is an expression of the most dissolute flattery. We need not give here examples of the loathsome adulation filling this book. They were all approved and edited by Stalin personally. Khrushchev continues. Stalin knew the country and agriculture only from films that dressed up and beautified the existing situation, and so pictured collective farm life that the tables were bending from the weight of turkey and geese. Evidently, Stalin believed it was so. The power in the hands of Stalin led to serious consequences during the war. To his leadership were dedicated many literary works and paintings full of fantasy. When we look at many of our novels, films, and historical scientific studies, they make us feel sick. Khrushchev continuing, all the more monstrous are the acts whose initiator was Stalin. We refer to the mass deportation of whole nations. The Kalmyk Autonomous Republic, the Karachi, the Chechen, English. The Ukrainians avoided meeting this fate only because there were too many of them, and there was no place to which to deport them. Thus spoke Khrushchev. He avoids mentioning the Jews in whose persecution he himself is deeply involved, and Budapest is still to come. October 1956, Budapest, Hungary. The Hungarian Writers' Union is attacking the communist government for oppressing freedom, distorting the truth, exploiting labor, and abusing the farmers. Students by the tens of thousands denounced the Soviet occupation. They ripped the hammer and sickle from their flag. They demand democracy, freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of the press and radio, general elections with a secret ballot. They march to the Budapest radio station to make their program known to the world. The student leaders are arrested and the crowd demands their freedom. Now the AVO, the Communist Security Police, opens fire. The first blood is drawn. The world has a new set of heroes, the freedom fighters, who rally during the night and win the support of the Hungarian army and the local police. Within 48 hours, Soviet troops enter Budapest. The Hungarians have a message for them. Russians, go home. Molotov cocktails, a homemade explosive, emphasizes the message. Eventually, the Soviets are forced to lift the siege of the Killian barracks, where a hastily organized defense under Colonel Pal Malater has withstood a violent assault. The AVO, the secret police who have barricaded themselves in the Communist Party building, are taken prisoners. Political prisoners are freed. One of them, Cardinal Minzetti, has been a captive for 8 years. Russians go home. Radio Moscow broadcasts, the Soviet government is prepared to revise its policy of stationing troops in Poland, Hungary, and Romania. The Red forces withdraw. Soviet officials and their families start to evacuate the city. For the moment, Hungary is free. For the moment. The Stalin statue, the symbol of tyranny, is brought down. The inscription reads, "Free Hungarian Radio." The free press rolls. Soldiers and freedom fighters celebrate. Janos Savo, one of the citizen heroes to emerge from the revolution. Malater, now the Hungarian commander in Budapest, and Kildy, the Minister of State, are invited to Soviet headquarters to discuss the final withdrawal of Soviet troops. It is a trap. Malater never returns. On the morning of November 4th, Soviet bombers attacked the city, the signal for an all-out assault by the Red Army. Says Khrushchev, you think that the communist system can be maintained only with the help of our armed forces? I would not fight for such a system. The communist system must be based on the will of the people. And if the people do not wish this system, let them establish the way of life they think best. But in Hungary as elsewhere, words are one thing, actions another. As the devastation continues, the Hungarian radio pleads, people of the world, listen to our aid, not with declarations, but with force. Your turn will come also if we perish. Listen to our cry and act. Extend to us your fraternal aid. May God be with you. Then silence. The aftermath, death. And again the inevitable refugees from communist tyranny. Premier Janos Kadar arrives in Moscow for instructions from Premier Bulganin. Khrushchev states, Comrade Janos Kadar is truly above all a revolutionary who is thoroughly dedicated to his cause. He is a loyal communist who stands on international Marxist-Leninist positions, who does not shun questions of class struggle. It is again apparent that communism requires a dictatorship to survive. With the blood scarcely hosed off the Budapest streets, Khrushchev begins to build his own image. He is a man of the people, a smiling, good-natured peasant. He is a man of the world, interested in people and problems everywhere. He meets with Sukarno of Indonesia, with Mao Zedong, and with Fidel Castro. Khrushchev is a peaceful man who sponsors peace organizations throughout the world. The communist narrator says,
The International Stalin Prize for the promotion of peace among nations is presented to the Cuban poet Nicolas Guillen.
And Khrushchev organizes movements for the abolition of atomic weapons. The truth is something else. The world finds that Khrushchev's brand of communism is no different than Lenin's or Stalin's. He breaks a solemn agreement for no further testing and resumes some 40 nuclear explosions, detonating a multi-megaton hydrogen bomb, the most awesome man-made explosion in history, apparently to frighten the world. Preaching disarmament on his own terms, he maintains the largest standing army on earth, a constant threat to peace, an ever-present instrument of blackmail. Says his Minister of War, Rodion Malinovsky,
Glory to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which has inspired and organized all our victories. Working for world peace, the Soviet state shows its ceaseless concern for the army, which has been called upon to stand guard over the gains of the revolution.
the peaceful man is dutifully following Lenin's advice. Every peace program is a deception of the people and a hypocrisy unless its principal object is to support, aid, and develop the revolutionary struggle. The smiling, good-natured peasant admonishes, if anyone believes that our smiles involve abandonment of the teachings of Marx, Engels, and Lenin, he deceives himself fully. Those who wait for that must wait until the shrimp learns to whistle. The man of the people restores the League of Militant Godless and founds 2 universities of atheism. He points out, communism has not changed its attitude toward religion. In this church, these 14-year-olds are forced to replace their communion with a youth oath, swears allegiance to the communist state. And these 3rd grade students are being sworn into the Communist Young Pioneer Organization. The children take the oath in answer to the question, are you prepared to give us your entire strength to work toward the noble goal of communism? Khrushchev accelerates the youth program and coordinates it on a worldwide basis, identifying communism with the future. This World Youth Festival, just another instrument of communist propaganda, is taking place in Vienna. The theme, as always, peace, a communist peace. Propaganda is big business for the Soviet Union. Khrushchev's excuse? Our enemies spend vast sums on subversive activities against socialist countries. The truth is, the Soviet Union is paying around $2 billion a year for their propaganda, employing about 500,000 people. Moscow spends approximately $2 per free man to be subjugated, as against 2 cents per person allocated to world propaganda by the free countries combined. The Soviet effort is roughly 100 times as great as that of all the rest of the world. The money to pay for this fantastic propaganda machine comes from the masses under the communist yoke, who work for absurdly low wages to enable their masters not only to dominate them the better, but to also deceive more successfully the masses in free countries. The importance of propaganda to the success of communism was emphasized by Lenin when he instructed, every sacrifice must be made, the greatest obstacles must be overcome in order to carry on agitation and propaganda systematically, perseveringly, persistently, and patiently. While Khrushchev believes he can win the world with his policy of peaceful coexistence, in China, where the communist tyranny is the same, the communist objective the same, the destruction of the dignity of man the same, Mao Zedong's conception of achieving the communist goal is different. Again and again, he says, war with the West is inevitable. It is desirable. Meanwhile, in China as everywhere else, communism produces waste, squalor, misery, and death. Thousands challenged the terror of the secret police to flee into British Hong Kong. From the day Mao takes power, the countries along the Chinese frontier are scenes of constant warfare. Communism feeds on its neighbors. In French Indochina, the native desire for freedom is perverted into a war of communist imperialism. Geneva, 1954. Red China's Zhou Enlai and French Premier Mendes France sign an armistice that surrenders the northern half of Vietnam, 12 million people, to longtime communist Ho Chi Minh. Like Germany and Korea, Indochina is now half slave, half free. The French leave according to the armistice terms. And with them go the inevitable refugees, 1 million of them fleeing to the south, where a constitutional government is being established. The communists take over North Vietnam, and red guerrillas continue the war against the south, demonstrating once again that with communists everywhere, words are one thing, actions another. Red Chinese invade and subjugate Tibet. At the first opportunity, the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet, escapes to India, where bloody riots are incited by communists as red troops assert constant pressure along the India-Chinese frontiers. Meanwhile, the red Chinese pose as friends and protectors of new nations, such as Nepal, and old nations such as Albania, and seek to extend communist influence into Latin America. Here in Peking, communist delegates from different Latin American countries meet their hosts, Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai. Their most important success occurs in Cuba, only 90 miles from the United States, where a brutal dictatorship under Fidel Castro has imposed the yoke of Marxism on the Cubans. Another 7 million people trapped behind the Iron Curtain. In Moscow, Yuri Gagarin, Soviet cosmonaut, speaks of the peaceful foreign policy of the Soviet government. Hands off revolutionary Cuba. The Nationalist Congress of Socialist Youth chooses Havana as its meeting place. Delegates are from the United States, China, Canada, and Russia. And the following year, Castro announces, "I am a Marxist-Leninist and will be one until the day I die." Castro wins a Lenin Peace Prize. In British Guiana, Chetty Jagan and wife head a strong communist party. Everywhere in Latin America, communism, feeding on poverty, ignorance, and despair, seethes and prepares to explode. Student demonstrations and riots, one of the favorite techniques to prepare the way for communist takeover, are ordered from Moscow. In Montevideo, Uruguay, communists protest the visit of President Eisenhower of the United States. In Caracas, Venezuela, Vice President Nixon is mobbed and his car stoned by communists. Red riots shake Japan to forestall the visit of President Eisenhower and the signing of the American-Japanese peace treaty. Throughout the non-communist world, again and again, on orders from Moscow, violence. It erupts too in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Europe, in supposed neutral Yugoslavia, in France. But in the communist world, the demonstrations are quite different. Despite the infamous Berlin Wall, a constant stream of refugees proves to the world that communism has never been the free choice of people anywhere. This is a grim tug of war. East German police try to pull this woman back to captivity. She finds freedom. Others find death. Khrushchev insists the Soviet state has not ruled and does not intend to rule anyone or impose our way of life upon anyone. For Khrushchev, as for Lenin, Stalin, Mao Zedong, and Castro, and as it must be for all communists, words are one thing, actions another. The communist